Welcome back to the weekly podcast with your host, Brayden Westman. We are joined here with our founder, Aiden.
Hello.
Today we'll be going over American legal system and American politics. American politics. Credit goes to hbr.org. Are American politics broken? Do you think America could fix their politics? If you answered yes to any of these questions, we might have the thing for you. A recent survey from Harvard Business School alumni suggests that the answer to "Are politics broken?" may be yes, and the bad political environment could be among the most important threats to the USA. Competitiveness. 60% of the alumni said that the effectiveness of the political system was worse in America than in any other advanced economies. The only complexity of the tax code, which received bad marks from 61% of those surveyed, was viewed more negatively. The real problem with American politics is the growing tendency of politicians to pursue victory above all else, to treat politics as war, which runs counter to basic Democrat values and may be crippling Washington's ability to reach solutions that capture the smartest thinking of both camps. Revisiting the nation's culture of democracy is essential, and because the economy's stakes are so high, business leaders may play an important role in the process. Political campaigns in America have always been a contact spot during the presidential election of 1800, for example. James Callender, one of Thomas Jefferson's agents, declared the incumbent President John Adams to be a hideous character which was neither the force of a man nor the gentleness and stability of a woman. Jefferson weathered similar attacks, including one of his beliefs which described him as a person who makes not even a profession of Christianity, who is without some baths, without sanctuary, and without so much as a decent external respect for the faith and worship of Christians. Sorry, this has to go into beliefs. Although the campaign of 1800 was usually personal and bitter, extreme partisan attacks resurfaced regularly in elections. Entire books such as David Mark's Going Dirty: The Act of Negative Campaigning was chronicled the no-hold-barred tactics that American politics used in the past. Indeed, such accounts often make President-day campaigns appear tame by comparison. What's different now has less to do with American politicians' campaign than how they've grown. Voting in the Congress is the most polarized it has been in well over 100 years, although the voting patterns of members of the two political parties saw some overlap of for the much of the 20th century. Moderate Republicans often voted to the left of the most conservative Democrats. The overlap has all but disappeared. Political scientists Nolan McCarty, Keith T. Pohl, and Howard Rosenthal uncovered this shift by tracking votes cast in Congress. They found that the main ideological difference between the two parties started rising sharply around 1979. It is now at an all-time high in the House and close to that in the Senate. The evidence is plain to see. Consider that the U.S. Congress passed the laws creating Social Security and Medicare with large bipartisan majorities in 1935 and 1965 respectively, but the Obama administration's Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act of 2010 barely squeaked through without a single Republican voting in favor of it. Unfortunately, there is no consensus on what's driven this increased polarization. Analysts point to everything from rising role of money in politics to partisan gerrymandating, the change in the way news is covered in the age of cable television and internet. But whatever the case, it is probably useless to focus on any single cause at this stage because many factors are now at play, all reinforcing one other. The phenom seems to have taken on a life of its own, and it's threatening the nation's capability to solve critical problems from employment, energy, to entitlements to education. What makes this especially distressing is the ideological divide over the government's role. Seemingly so destructive today has historically been one of the most constructive features of American political life. The clash between competing philosophies of government is as old as America itself. There are two archetypal views. One rests on the deep spect- skepticism of government, practically the federal government, a sense that is inconsistent, invasive, and easily corrupted, and that its involvement in private activity is often coercive. The other embodies our pragmatic faith in government's power to serve society, the conviction that it can be harnessed for good in the public sector, however imperfect, and can be deployed to solve problems that individuals and private corporations have trouble solving on their own. While the rivalry between these two broad philosophies has been vigorous for centuries, it has always often provided highly productive. Take the long-standing debate over whether the government should be more or less active in the economy, and in many cases the answer publicity markers arrived at was not more government or less, but more and less. Targeted in the right way, in the 1840s, when politicals most skeptical of the government were pushing for fiscal retrenchment and balanced budget provisions in the wake of a financial crisis. Those with greater confidence in the government were demanding free public schooling, which amounted to a government takeover of primary education. In the end, most American states put in place both balanced budget provisions and free public education. American history is full of such examples of constructive competition, although Jefferson and Hamilton personified important elements of two opposing philosophies. Both served in the cabinet of President George Washington and were able to put aside their differences and broker deals when necessary, notably in managing the national debt when America's finances were still shaky. The philosophies often became intertwined in other policy issues, and from early broadcast regulation when the government nationalized the airways but left broadcasting almost entirely in private hands to the New Deal financial legislation, which regulated commercial banks with a heavy hand but externed a relatively lighter touch of the rest of the financial system. Perhaps the most remarkable example involves the struggle between politicians and free traders. For much of its early history, the United States prompted the growth of its industries by instituting tariffs and other forms of protection. Unlike the developing countries, however, is used or This helped uh, this helped prevent companies and from becoming complacent and slow as a result of continued protection. The competition between rival philosophies, especially between the protections in the North and free traders in the South, made permanent protection impossible. The rough balance of power ensured a distant mix of politics over long-term, not moderate traffics all the time, but traffics during early industrialization and low traffic periods. However, the fierce competition between opposing views of government may now be degenerating into something toxic. Policy making in America is approaching all-out war where victory is a paramount, compromise is a dirty word, and virtually any issue of development can become a weapon for bolstering the other side. The premium placed on ideological purity and desire to win at any cost are dangerous trends, almost lemons in the other orientation. According to MIT's Stefan van Everen, a distinguished political scientist in 1924, Viktor Chanarev, a political rival of Vladimir Lenin, wrote in Foreign Affairs, politics to him meant strategy. Pure and simple victory was the only competent to observe. The will to rule and carry through a political program without compromise, that was the only virtue. Hesitation, that was only the crime. For Leon, he continued, politics is disguised war, and the rules of war continue its principles. The absolute approach to politics feels disturbingly familiar in America today. The favorite to win too often appears to be trump everything else, including respect for other opponents, the integrity of institutions, and even the health of democracy itself. The idea of allowing each side to win part of its agenda increasingly seen as tantamount to surrender in many quarters. The dangerous turn in U.S. politics became practically evident during the debt selling crisis of July 2011, when the federal government came precisely close to defaulting on its own obligations. Some politicians even suggested that a government default or shutdown would be less damaging than compromise. It's an inconvenience. It would be frustrating to many people, and it's not a great thing, one Senate candidate warned just before being elected in 2010. At the same time, it's not something that we can rule out. It must be absolutely necessary. Although the crisis was resolved for short term at the 11th hour, Standard and Poor's downgraded the U.S. credit rating from AAA to AA+ just days later, voicing its sense of alarm over the political brinkmanship of recent months. The rating agency explained the downgrade reflects our view that the effectiveness, stability, and predictability of American policy-making and political instructions have weakened to Standard and Poor many others. American politics have radically changed. It's impossible to know just yet if American politics have truly gone astray. Years from now, people may marvel at how the U.S. political system, seemingly at war with itself, managed to carry the nation successfully through a most difficult period, but it's possible that they will look back and wonder how the country allowed bad politics to undercut a mighty economy. Seems reasonable, therefore, to start looking for ways to strengthen the political system. What's needed in something basic but demanding? A real sense of commitment to the health of democracy. Above party, economic interest, and ideologically, the critical because the competition between opposing views of government seems to prove not to prove most fruitful, but it takes place in the context of such a shared commitment. Dis- Disagreements may be intense, but taken they are only taken only so far, as in family. Rebuilding Americans' culture of democracy is essential. Everyone has a role to play, but business leaders can take 4 steps to make a difference. CEOs should make it clear that every turn that vibrant republic is foundation of strong economy and that all Americans, including business leaders, must be careful not to let their for winning overshadow their commitment to the integrity of political process. CEOs should build a bipartisanship council on public properties. The goal should be not merely to split the difference between liberals and conservatives, but to help each side articulate its highest priorities with an eye toward facilitating the implement of the best of both of their time. Business leaders should promote a deeper understanding on how American democracy functioned in the past. The effort could involve anything from funding new research on the history of American democracy to sponsoring educational television programs, lectures, series, and book clubs. Business leaders should urge public officials and the public at large to restore civis to its rightful place in the classroom. Data shows that many schools fail to effectively teach the working of U.S. democracy or the responsibilities that go with citizenship. Just as America couldn't be globally competitive without a well educated workforce. It can't retain its economic edge without a well educated electorate. That is really to meet the relentless challenges of democratic governance. There's nothing wrong with competing views of government. They have served the United States well in the past for competition to prove constructive. However, Americans need to remind themselves that the nation's progress has been rooted in 2 great philosophies of government, not one putting the health of democracy first in surest way to get best of both. The next topic of legal system by Cato.org will be shortly.
you.